It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
And welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Breakfast. Here we are once again on a Wednesday morning, covering all of your real estate news from all corners of the Australian property market, 7 days a week. And yes, we are on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Amazon. And it's the 14th day, nearly halfway through the month as well, 14th of August. And good morning to Reese and Steph on the Gold Coast in Miami. Lovely spot that you're in there. You wrote in regarding the tiny home interview that we did with Louise on Saturday, and to say that you both like the idea of smaller and living in a rural setting with a smaller payment commitment. You say that you can both work from home, and that you are looking at buying work pods that you have separate from your main living space. That is such a great idea. It's one that I hadn't considered, because two people working in a tiny home all day, every day, that could be a little bit challenging, especially as a couple. But if you've got your own little work pod, that's pretty cool. So thank you for taking the time, Reese and Steph. And a reminder, if you'd like to send us an email, you can do that. Our email address is myrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's a question. Are you at the moment looking to purchase your first property investment? Well, we're going to be talking about that in just a moment. Is it overwhelming you, or are you excited to be underway with your property journey? If you are new to the market, it can be a daunting prospect with a number of things to factor into the equation, which is why it's great to have a solid strategy. So once again, let's catch up with Sarah Thomson from Loan Market there in Geelong. I want to circle back to these little hubs, these work hubs, these pods that people buy and put in their backyard, because you're in the mortgage game here. There's a bit of a difference, isn't there, with tiny homes as opposed to somebody that's got a traditional house with, land.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be things like you can't put a tiny home on your property if you don't already have an established dwelling, So I suppose with the tiny homes, also funding as well is sometimes an issue, because if it's not a permanent structure, generally the bank can't lend against that land that they have unless they can get some cash out. So get a loan against the land and then pay for the tiny home to actually be put on that property. So that can sometimes cause a bit of an issue. And the same thing with pods. Generally, you can pick up the pods. If this is the same as the couple in Queensland, generally you could pick up that pod and take that to another site. So it's not a permanent structure. Therefore, the banks can't lend against it.
Oh, okay. So even if we throw the scenario up that somebody has funded entirely their little tiny home on wheels, and perhaps they've purchased a little bit of land. So we want to buy two pods. In this case, that's what they want to do. We want to buy two pods and we'll give you security over the land. They wouldn't look at that?
No, at the moment, there's a client at the moment who has a large block of land they're allowed to build a permanent home on, but they can't get a tiny home on that because there's not a permanent home on it at the moment. The pods, though, I'm thinking in my head, the pods are those little office pods that you then have your private areas. They would be, I'm assuming, a pick up and take away from that site. Therefore, it doesn't add to the value of the property because it can be removed.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So some great pieces of information there. Let's segue into people buying their first investment property this morning. As I said, it can be a little bit of a daunting prospect, this one. Perhaps, Sarah, start us off with what some of the key factors investors should be thinking about and also considering when choosing their first investment property.
Yeah, look, there's all those things on the real estate agent side, that are really important. And then there's the difference with that for the finance side. So, obviously things like location and is there transport close by, infrastructure, schools, etc. But on top of that, the things we look for, especially on the lending side, are things like body corporate. Is it a large body corp that the investor is going to be paying? Because the banks will also put those body corp fees generally on top of people's normal living expenses. So it can actually reduce the amount you can lend in some instances. Things like size of apartments. So if it is an apartment, is it over a certain square meterage? Banks look at that as well. What sort of rental are you receiving? Do you have a good property manager? Obviously vital. If you're not going out to look at the property and check on the tenants and the place being looked after well, you really want a good property manager. Buyer's agents can be fabulous. There's so many that we work with that help clients liaise with the real estate agent or find them the property. They can be very good to use. Things like building inspections, definitely getting a building inspection. If you're going to have it as an investment, you want to make sure that you're not going to be pouring money hand over foot with any issues with the property as well. And I suppose also established or build. If you look at building inspections and there's a lot of work to do, would you prefer to go a build? There's higher depreciation for that as opposed to an older property. So there's definitely lots of things to look at.
All right then, so let's talk about the different financing options that are available for first-time property investors and how they differ from owner-occupied loans, because there are various loan products that are out there that really do get tailored for people's investment properties, including interest-only loans. So perhaps sort of talk through that.
Yeah, look, when rates were really low, we found many investors were doing actually principal and interest on their home loans. But now that rates have actually increased, we're seeing a lot of people going back to interest only. So it allows people to pay the minimum amount on the investment property, and then surplus funds can go to paying down their owner-occupier if they do have one. Really important to look at things like the structure. Do we, or a lot of times banks may cross-collateralize two properties, so an owner-occupier and the new investment, and they'll cross both of those properties, which means that the lending has to be with the same bank. A lot of times we'll actually get cash out from one property as a loan, and then the other property can go with a totally different bank. Because some banks will have good owner-occupier rates and some might have really good investor rates. So sometimes you do need to split your lending. Lenders at the moment, some of them will go to 95% loan, which means that you only need a 5% deposit plus costs for the property. So is it better to pay 95%, pay some lenders mortgage insurance and get into the market faster? Or is it best to sit there and keep saving for another year or two, hoping that you're then going to have enough for a higher deposit? I suppose the cost of doing business, is the lender's mortgage insurance worth it or not? But yeah, lots of lenders, that we can use. You can tap into the equity to get cash out of for clients, but also banks' valuations can be very different to the next one. So generally the higher valuations we'll look at because that's tapping into more equity for clients and then saving them things like lender's mortgage insurance.
Okay. We are talking to Sarah Thomson there at Loan Market in Geelong. We'll come back after this and find out a little bit more about the information that you should be thinking about from an investment point of view.
Every week, real estate transactions take place as the market shifts month by month. And every day, we keep you better informed and updated on the Real Estate Podcast.
And since we're talking about mortgages this morning, Australian mortgage holders are feeling the pressure, with new research from Finder revealing that some are spending up to 60% now of their income on repayments. That is not the average. The average is around 34% of people's income to mortgages, but 1 in 10 is dedicating half of their earnings just to keep up with payments. And the situation, of course, is dire, particularly as interest rates have risen sharply, leaving some homeowners trapped in this mortgage prison that we talk about without any refinancing options.
Decode the property market with insider knowledge and insights to better navigate your real estate journey on the Real Estate Podcast.
And it is a Real Estate Wednesday. We are talking to Sarah there in Geelong. Geelong. I guess we should talk about when somebody rocks up and wants a mortgage. Often people, they've got no idea how much they can loan. So for the purposes of our first-time investors, perhaps talk through how they can determine their borrowing capacity and ensure that they don't overextend themselves financially.
Yeah, we'll definitely go through with clients, what repayments are, check their borrowing capacity and see how high they can go. And again, every lender is different. I know I always say this, but every bank is different. And you'll have some lenders that will take into account 80% of the rental income coming in when they're looking at serviceability for a client. Some will do 90, some will do 70. They're all very, very different. So another thing would also be being confident on the rental that you're going to be receiving. So you really want to know that when you're buying something, are you going to be getting what the real estate agents have said the property is actually going to be renting for? So checking online as well to make sure it's in keeping with the other properties. Buffers, making sure that clients have buffers to allow for contingencies. And that might be, hot water that goes on the fritz or gardens that need, fixing, any mishaps or broken windows along the way. So making sure that clients do have a buffer and it's not right to the wire. I know obviously in Victoria now we have lovely land tax for investors. So we're finding that a lot of investors, the land tax might have gone from $800 to nearly $3,000. And there's a lot of these stories around at the moment, but also making sure that clients have enough of those funds. So by paying interest only, keeping your payments down, then things like land tax now would be able to be a little bit fairer, but we're finding a lot of people are really struggling with that land tax at the moment, and that was something that nobody really saw coming.
And it's always a good idea to do a little bit of a checklist of some of the common pitfalls that investors need to avoid when purchasing an investment property. So perhaps you can also step over some of those for people this morning who are tuned in thinking, gee, am I across everything that I need to be?
Yeah, absolutely. And these can sometimes throw up like little red herrings along the way that you do see. But probably underestimating costs and overestimating rent is sometimes one. But choosing a property not on emotion, but on the numbers. Something that's old and needs a lot of work, we generally find people might get a really good deal, but then they're spending so much money renovating the property and time and loss of rent with things like that as well. Unusual ones we see, though, are things like telecommunication pits or towers, power lines that are close to homes. The banks sometimes have a 40 or 50 metre rule where you can't have the large power lines close to homes. Very small apartments, that's another one that we see, or studio accommodation or student accommodation. And they might be really good rentals, but the lending side of it, sometimes they'll be really, not hard to place, but a lot lower loan to value ratio. So people needing a bigger deposit or equity to be able to do those. Acreage is another one with farming. So many different things that we see. So you'd always want to be working with your broker or bank to make sure that the property you're looking at, we'd always get people to send through a link for the actual property so that we can check it and know which lenders they're actually going to use or we can use for them.
Okay, all right. So there's quite a lot of information. Great to catch up with you once again, Sarah. You are full of information and enjoy your Wednesday. Catch you back in a couple of weeks' time there in Geelong.
Thank you, Craig. Have a great day.
Let's explore together the power of real estate. We keep you better informed and updated.
If we saw a big tick down in the unemployment rate, that is likely to signal that inflation pressures are going to be stronger and is the thing that may actually bring the RBA back to the table and give us another hike.
It's just taking such a long period of time. I've never known a property cycle like this. The RBA, they sat down and they thought, what's the key word that we can use to try and sort of paint a bit of a picture on the position that we are in? And the word that they came up with, Sean, is sticky.
Look, they're really referring to the persistence of inflation pressures, and it's really kind of evident. The hope is that we're going to have a little bit of a circuit breaker in some administered prices with big utility subsidies coming through from Q3, which will give some relief. But yeah, I think we've all been a little bit surprised at the kind of life of its own that this inflation cycle's taken on.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.